I'll start by thanking our sponsor today, Smart Label. Many of you are familiar with Smart Label. It's a tremendous initiative that provides information on more than 75,000 of our industry's products. As e-commerce becomes a larger force in the CPG industry, the benefits of Smart Label increase exponentially. For more information on this initiative, please visit smartlabel.org. I also want to thank PwC for their support of the CPG Speak series. PwC is a tremendous partner of our organization, and we're grateful for their support. If you're interested in getting information on upcoming sessions through CPG Speaks, please go to consumerbrands.association.org/CPG Speaks. But let's get started with today's session, and I'm excited to be joined by Drew Facer, President and CEO of Idahoan Foods, Ryals McMullian, President and CEO of Flowers Foods, and Al Williams, President and CEO of Bush Brothers. Each of these companies have faced unique challenges over the past 5 months and have some interesting stories and insights to share. Today, we'll touch on operational complexities and how each company has met the increased demand in their product categories, the steps they've taken to ensure worker safety and production, how their brands have responded to the change in consumer behavior, and we'll conclude by taking a look at the future. So thank you to each of them for joining. Let's get started, not with a question, but more offering each of you, and we'll start, Drew, with you. If you can take 30 seconds and just give some background on your company, your products, and then we'll hand it off to Al and Ryals and ask them to do the same.
Certainly, Jeff, and thank you for having me on. So Idahoan Foods was created in 1960 with the purpose of using fresh potatoes that were too small to be used for table potatoes or bakers. And we've transitioned dramatically over the years, wherein we were more of an industrial company, but today we fresh dry potato products for retail and food service specifically. We have distribution in over 40 countries. The products are built around convenience and quality. They include varieties such as mash, casseroles, hash browns, and we have 90% brand loyalty on the flavored mash products. Fun fact is over the past year, we've had 1.7 billion servings of Idahoan purchased by retail outlets in the United States, as recorded by IRI. So a lot of potatoes. It's no small potatoes, even though we process them.
Al, how about you?
Well, Bush Brothers, we're a family-owned company. We started in 1908 canning tomatoes. Now we're primarily a bean company. Most of you know the baked bean, and we have a substantial market share. And I guess a fun fact for us is that we have a talking dog, too. So I don't know. I don't think he's going to be able to join us today, but if he shows up, I'll let everybody know.
But you don't have any play on words like no small potatoes like Drew used?
No, Drew's pretty quick with that stuff. I mean, you got to
right off the
get up early to beat him.
Ryals?
Sure. Flowers Foods, for those who aren't familiar, is a baked foods company. Right about $4 billion in revenue last year. Some of our brands you may be familiar with. Nature's Own soft variety bread is the #1 soft variety loaf in the United States. Dave's Killer Bread is the #1 organic bread in the country. And Canyon Bakehouse is the #1 gluten-free bread brand in the country, among several other brands, including Tasty Cake and some regional bread brands. We're 100 years old, so not quite as old as Bush. Founded in 1919 by two brothers, so been in business a long time. Grew a lot by acquisition over the years. We've done some 115 acquisitions since we went public back in 1968. And fun fact, Jeff, particularly in this day and age and environment, before me, only 6 CEOs of the company over the course of the 100-year history before me. So
that's incredible longevity for folks. I've had the pleasure to join you down in Thomasville, Georgia, and seen the museum down there. It's quite a tribute to the company and what you guys have accomplished over 100 years. In your case and in Al's case, you're both relatively new CEOs. And I'm pretty confident that neither of your predecessors ever mentioned the word pandemic to you. Talk to me a little bit about when you had that moment when you knew this wasn't normal, and what was the first thing you did about it? Go ahead, Ryals.
Sure, I'll go first. Really, around March. I mean, our week 12 is the one I remember the most, because that's where we really saw the peak of the panic buying. We started to see it, kind of rise beginning on the West Coast, and so we knew something was going on. We were all reading the news reports coming out of Seattle and California, and knew this was very, very serious, but didn't really know how much it was going to really start affecting our operations until we saw that panic buying really start to ramp up. And at the same time, about 20% of our business is food service. Of course, we were seeing that go directly the opposite way. Which kind of ironically helped us some, because we were able to convert some of that food service capacity over to the DSD side of the business. About 85% of our business is perishable product delivered DSD.
Al, what about you? When did you realize this wasn't business as usual? And what was the first pretty dramatic thing you did about that?
Yeah, we saw it. So if you look, we went back, if you look at the last week of February, compare that to the first week of March, we saw a 50% increase in orders for that 1 week. And then within about 4 weeks of that, we saw about a 300% increase in orders. And then, of course, by that time, you could see the shelves being emptied out. So, and so there was a lot of depleted shelves. So one of the things that we had to do was actually go in, and we reduced the number of SKUs that we were offering, because we were trying to get our most popular products out there to the consumers. And so we took our high volume SKUs and really focused our plants on running those SKUs. And, I think that really helped us. Our production volume went up substantially from what it normally would, because we didn't have all the changeovers. And and we were able to fill the shelves up somewhat. It's still, with that kind of sales volume increase, it didn't keep increasing that much. It did level off. But we were still seeing a lot of consumption. So even when the product would get there, they would repurchase again. So and pretty much we were actually looking at it, because that was going into our busy season. And so we had a fair amount of inventory. So that was one of the benefits to us, to really make it through that first few weeks of the big wave. But I think Drew and some of his products were right in the middle of their busy season. So we were actually fortunate that we kind of had some inventory going into it.
Well, and Jeff, Jeff, if you don't mind, I'll jump in, because I called Al and I talked. It had to be late February when we saw this happening, and so I'd called Al, or vice versa. I can't remember who called him, and we kind of compared notes as to what was happening and how each one of us were addressing it, because that item suspension became a big deal, because we did have to pull items back. And then we also went through some of an allocation, and our team, because of that, was able to, because it was a combination between sales, operations. I mean, it was a company-wide supply chain. It was all hands on deck. And from March through June, our fill rates still stayed at 96, 81, 90, 99, and 99%. Without the item suspension, that wouldn't have been possible. But for us, it was more important to just get items on the shelf, because as Al said, the shelves became bare. It was tough. Everybody talked about toilet paper, because that kind of stole the show on a lot of things. But we just had such a rough time, and immediately, as soon as we saw it happening, we saw it happen in Italy first, is where we saw it in February. We were watching Italy really close.
Yeah. Yeah, Jeff, one of the interesting distinctions for us is that, because Al was talking about inventories, we basically don't have any inventory, being fresh and DSD. So, the moving to a limited assortment across the entire network was really key for us, because there was just no backfill to take to the stores, and we're basically producing to order virtually every day. Now we had a lot of experience with this, particularly in the Southeast, because it's kind of the model we go to when a hurricane comes through Florida or Texas or up the East Coast. We'll run that model. So the company knew how to do it, but we'd never done it, across all 46 bakeries before. So it was quite a feat to get it done.
You mentioned DSD, Ryals, and I've talked to a lot of your counterparts throughout this crisis, and they talked about being DSD as really a gift at this time, as retailers struggled, as warehouses struggled. Talk a little bit about how perhaps DSD gave you a little bit of a leg up.
It did. I mean, it's really service to the retailers, right? I mean, we're furiously going there every day. I'm not gonna sit here and tell anybody that we weren't out of stock at some point somewhere along the way. But for the most part, even during the very height of it, because our independent distributors are going to the store virtually every day, the bakeries are churning out product every day. Perhaps Flowers and others in our industry, were able to maybe serve the stores a little bit better, particularly at the beginning. I know, people caught up as we started moving through this, but particularly at the height of the panic buying, being able to get that product quickly to the shelves on a daily basis to replenish as well was also important. Now, for us being fresh, there's not as much pantry loading either, right? Because it's going to go bad. So that that it's important for that product to be there for those repeats as folks come back to refill the bread stock.
Does this possibly, when you think of direct store delivery, DSD, does this possibly lead to more companies or more categories wanting to pursue that approach in the future, or are we set in the categories that do it and the categories that don't?
The one thing I'll say about it is, for fresh products, there's probably not a better model out there. I don't, you can experiment with drop ships, and some people do that, and we even do a little bit of it. But to really serve the consumer and the customer, going DSD is probably the best way. But it's also not cheap. It's a pretty expensive way to go to market, which is probably why, some folks have decided to move away from it and go to the warehouse. But for us, it remains the best path to market.
Drew or Al, do you have any comments on that topic?
For us, I think we saw, for the most part, we had a few customers that were having some problems getting it through their warehouse. But as we depleted our inventory in forward warehouses, we started doing more direct ships, and we would ship directly, from our plants, and they were able to pick it up and get the product on the shelf fairly quickly, with the understanding that this was a tremendous pull on them, and people were just raking the shelves of product. So for us, I don't see that that's a necessary thing to do. They've got a pretty good warehouse system for our product line.
And likewise with us, it worked out really well. We did, like I say, it was all hands on deck, and we did, the supply chain team did a lot of good during the process. I think the retailers did a pretty good job of, because they were going through this, we all had our own issues to deal with. They had the issues that was spread across everybody who supplies them. I think the one thing that shocked me, if you talk about the things that shock you through the process, is I watched one of our finished goods warehouse become an ingredient and packaging goods storage. So it was necessary for us to look ahead and make sure we had the incoming supply so we could build the products, whether it was packaging or ingredients, and to watch those warehouses become depleted, and then start to fill those with other supplies so we can continue to run. Something I've never seen before in my career.
Drew, that might, that ability to be nimble might get to this next question I have for you. In the case of Bush Brothers, they had a good amount of inventory built up, hadn't yet reached Memorial Day, which they would have been building towards. In the case of Flowers Foods, the direct store delivery was a leg up. In the case of your company, a company that has great name recognition, great brand recognition, but maybe not at the same scale as some of the others, what are some of the ways that being perhaps a little bit smaller, a little bit more nimble, worked in your favor during this situation?
Well, and Jeff, you mentioned that, and we've always looked at household penetration. And what we saw is stigmas become dissolved overnight. And while household penetration is important to us, the number that was even more impressive is the people who were close to buying in the category. That number shrunk. And so immediately we had a lot of interest in the category that hadn't been there before. And so with this renaissance of center store aisles and the change, we felt like we had a unique opportunity to recreate and reestablish a foundation of trust with consumers. And we know that the people they want products that offer convenience, quality, authenticity, and save them time. So we felt like it was a time for us to really communicate what our platform was. And so we immediately commissioned a study with IRI because it wasn't so much for us. We looked at it and he says, our short-term efforts are going to be really muted if people stock up and then don't pull it out of the pantry. And so for us, we worked with IRI to see what is the long-term pull going to be, because we felt like that was just as important as filling up the short term. And so we began a project called Project Demystify that was aimed at showing our fresh dried process or method through a video series. And what that simply does is it shows the consumers that what we do in our operations is really not that much different than what consumers do at home. Our pile of potato is just much larger. Yeah. And our peelers are much larger. We'll do 900 pounds of potatoes at a time and waste a lot less of what people do at home. Our pots happen to be 100 times larger, but it's still the same process. So we took that message out to the consumer, and because that was our biggest concern was, one, it was important for the teams to work together to make sure we got as much product we could out the door. We have 3 lines within one of our plants. They're more antiquated. We keep them on board. We've been tempted to pull them out at times, but they're there in case we do have a big surge in demand. So we fired up those lines. We did everything we could. Our plants were operating, quite a nice capacity, but we moved everything to optimal capacity, including operating the lines that maybe were less efficient. We also moved people from the food service lines because, like Ryals says, with flowers, we also have a food service side of our business, and we took some of that labor and moved it into the retail lines. And all of that had to be done very quickly.
Well, in speaking about the facilities, let's switch over and talk a little bit about workplace safety and production. Before I do that, let me encourage people who are watching, please use the Q&A option there to post any questions you might have. We'll go through those and ask as many as we can as we go through this discussion. But let's switch over and talk about worker safety. Obviously, the industry has made extraordinary investments in protecting the workforce and making that absolutely paramount to keeping the facilities running, giving the employees the confidence to come into the workplace each time. Talk a little bit about, and let me start with Al, talk a little bit about some of the policies you've implemented to protect the workforce and to ensure, I think, the viability of the supply chain throughout this process.
Yeah, for us, it was, because if you go back to when we started this, we didn't have enough PPE, and so there weren't enough tests to go around. If you go back in February in the very beginning, and so we had a couple of employees tested positive for COVID, and so we shut the plant down. We were able to get through the University of Tennessee and some local contacts. We were able to get enough tests for every one of our employees and anybody going into the plant. We were also able to get a cleaning company to come in and sanitize thoroughly for the virus. And then we had another company come in behind them and actually do an audit on that cleaning process. And I remember we shut the plant down on that Wednesday. On Friday, we tested every employee. And on Sunday night, we opened back up and we had 6 more employees that had tested positive. But everybody, they were going to be quarantined, or anybody that had been around them, but everybody else came into the plant, had a clean bill of health. And so, there was a lot going on behind the scenes. And so, and if you go back to that time, it was really remarkable that all those things happened, because it wasn't but a week or two later that those tests that we used and the lab that worked all weekend to get us the results, those were almost federalized. So they started doing a lot more with the Department of Health. And, so it almost, if it had happened a few weeks earlier, we wouldn't have been able to get those results. But you talk about PPE. We had, it was funny. We had our legal counsel call our CFO and try to get a PayPal transaction in North Georgia. The guys, one of our employees at the visitor center has a pickup truck to pick up 14,000 masks that we found because we couldn't find them anywhere. So we were able to get the masks, deliver them to the plant, and have every employee have a mask by the time we started work. So there was a lot going on that, I mean, a lot of that stuff's available now, but at the time, I mean, we were really struggling,
Ryals, what about you?
Yeah, a lot of similar stories. I mean, we set up a task force to address all things COVID really. Had some trouble getting masks in the beginning, but I imagine are now doing many things that most of the other companies on this call and off the call are doing. Enhanced sanitation procedures, obviously masks, partitions where we can do it. We have travel restrictions in place. We have very restrictive visitor policies that are actually still in place. They're just now beginning to loosen a little bit, to restrict visitation, particularly into the bakeries. The hardest thing really now is because we haven't really had a problem inside of the plant as far as spread inside the plant. We've certainly had cases, and we've had more cases since the economy has started to reopen than we did at the very beginning. We had almost none at the beginning. The real challenge now is not spread within the bakeries. We're temperature screening, doing all those different things. It's what people are doing when they leave, and with the economies opening back up, people socializing more, going back into restaurants and all that. That's in large measure why we've seen the number of cases rise a bit since about mid-June.
Is it, I mean, to your point, some of your facilities, your headquarters on the border of Georgia and Florida, certainly a hot spot right now. Yeah. I'm hearing reports of more call outs across the industry, more people being exposed, more people through contact tracing that are being connected to those who were exposed. What is that doing to you in terms of absenteeism? And I'll ask the same of Drew and Al. If we think back to March, this was primarily in the Northeast and in the Northwest. Now it's moving. Is that creating newfound challenges for you?
It definitely is. I mean, as I said in the beginning, our number of call outs and confirmed cases were really, really low. I mean, just a handful. Fast forward to today, we have quite a few. They're spread out all over the place. You mentioned Florida. We have 4 bakeries in Florida, so we certainly felt it there. We felt it in Georgia. We certainly felt it in Texas. It does create some operational challenges because you have to have enough people to run a line. And, we've had situations where we've had to, close a bakery for a couple of weeks. Again, not because there's been, a widespread outbreak at the plant, but just because, you take enough people off of the shift. Well, you can't run that shift. You take enough people out of the bakery that are out on quarantine or have been confirmed with COVID. You can't run the bakery. Fortunately for us, we have enough bakeries that we can back that production into other plants and not really skip a beat serving the market, but it's not the most efficient way to do it. So, and that kind of continues. Most of the time it's a line, that has to shut down here or there for a little while, but there's been a couple instances where it's been a whole plant for a couple of weeks.
I was speaking with one company earlier today, large company. They had 26 mechanics at a facility, 13 of them out for a period of time because of being exposed to others. And it's hard to keep all those lines running with 50% of the mechanics that you would usually have.
Absolutely.
Is your situation, you're out in the Mountain West, is your situation similar? Are you seeing that increase? Are you concerned as we head into the fall here?
Well, the concern is definitely built because we didn't have our first cases until we got to right before the 4th of July. And it's not so much what happens. I mean, we can take all the precautions that we possibly can in our offices and in the plants, but it's really and as Ryals said, we can't control what happens outside the plants. So we didn't have our first cases. And I do think that there was, obviously, as you see the trend through the nation, it started hitting the more rural areas. But we haven't had to have any major shutdowns. We take each case independently, and it all depends on who that, you go back to the contact, who the trace contacting and who they been in association with and what parts of the plants. And we've done a lot of what Al had mentioned was outside sanitation. We have a company on deck for sanitation. We also have our own sanitation crews, medical hotline. There's a organization here in the state called Crush the Curve that offers testing. We've done the same types of things that Flowers and Bush's have done with the pay practices, the incentives, the thank yous. We also did something else that was really unique. And the whole company got behind this. And we haven't, as we've had cases, we haven't had the issue of people not returning back to work. And we really built this on a foundation of our purpose of feeding America, because we are a critical infrastructure organization. And so we've taken that on. And this might sound like just the most simple thing ever, but we had shirts made that were Feed America shirts. Our people wear those with pride. It's one of my favorite T-shirts because there is a purpose behind it. And I think the other part of this that hasn't been said is the role that the plant managers have played, because our plant managers, they immediately shut down the plants to essential employee mandate. So if you weren't essential, then all visitors were cut out. And then also HR. HR has been just an incredible asset. They've done a tremendous job in the communication. And we haven't got to, we haven't really reviewed this, but I look at the number of pieces of communication in different formats that we've had over the last several months. And it's more so than any time. It's probably more communication than we've had in the last 2 or 3 years. Just a very open, intellectually honest communication to our people. And so, yes, we are a rural company. I know there are bigger issues that Ryals will have, that Ryals has probably in larger metropolitan markets, but we haven't experienced that to date. And we're just trying to stay ahead of it as well as we can.
You mentioned increased communication. It leads me to ask a different question in terms of, we've talked so much about the plants, but we also have a big chunk of your workforce, your corporate workforce, who is working remotely. Can you guys give me some insights in terms of your attitude prior to this about remote work, your attitude about remote work today, your prediction of what sticks going forward? Ryals, you want to start?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I mean, as far as my attitude towards it, I think you really just kind of get stuck in your ways and tradition. And for us at Flowers, it's a very much of an in-person, fly here, there, or wherever to meet, and it's just and it's habit. And so there was never really a big push to go to a remote work situation or rely like we are now on Zoom or Teams or whatever platform you're using. I will say though, now that we've done it, we were pushed into it by the situation, but now that we've done it, it's worked remarkably well for us. I mean, we conduct all our meetings on Teams to the extent that the folks are working remotely. We've also done, I think our last 4 or so board meetings have been remote over Microsoft Teams. And I've been amazed at how well it's worked, how collaborative we've been able to be over this virtual platform. And we are working on a different remote work policy going forward. Now, for the time being, we're still out of the office. Some of us cycle through kind of in shifts, if you will. But for the most part, we're remote working. And like I said, I've been very pleasantly surprised with how well it has worked for us. And you can certainly see going forward, we're all trying to manage costs better. You can certainly save on some travel costs. There are certainly times when you need to be there, but there are times when it's not necessary. And this platform's proven pretty valuable to us.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think when it first started, we were all forced into it. But I was really, really pleased with our IS department and how quick that we were able to get everybody set up and going, and the information that we were able to get, decisions we were able to make, and it's been very impressive. I think going forward, you got to make sure that people have work-life balance, and I think there's a lot of people working a lot of hours, and if you're not used to working at home, you may end up working longer. I'll get emails from people late in the evening and that sort of thing. And that's good if it's just about flexibility, but you want people to be able to turn it off. And I think as we go into the fall, one of the things that we're concerned about here in Knoxville is the school situation we have a lot of, parents that are working from home now. And if they go back to school, what are they going to be able to, how are they going to be able to manage that if we bring everybody in the office and then they shut schools back again and that sort of thing. So we've really been pushing it out. We've said we'll discuss it again in August, but right now there's no plans to bring anybody back in August. We'll talk about it after Labor Day and kind of just look at it month at a time and see how it's progressing. Because I do think it's been really good. I think a lot of people love it, but there is a camaraderie that you get from being around people, especially us. Culture is very important to us, and so we do want to get back together at some point. But I don't know that you ever go back to the way it was completely, because of what Ryals said. I think it opened our eyes to a different way of doing some things, and so I think we'll continuously evaluate that.
Go ahead, Drew.
Hey, Jeff, on that one, I think that ultimately we're making decisions to maximize work production with the least amount of disruption, regardless as to whether somebody is in an operations facility or the office. And while I do believe that, we've seen a great amount of productivity, but at the same time, I think I'd be naive as a leader to recognize that there is something that's lost in training and mentoring. And I'll mention that camaraderie. And I believe that there is a little bit lost. I don't know how long we can sustain. I don't think you can sustain having a large number of your workforce. There may be specific jobs that will be highly productive from other locations and such, but I also get worried concerning the transition, or not the transition, but the conveyance of culture and mentoring and training and helping our people grow and develop. I think that's one of my largest concerns right now as a leader of Idahoan, is to try to ensure that our people have that growth and have those opportunities. And that doesn't mean that it can't be done virtually, but I do believe that there will come a time when some of that face-to-face interaction is necessary. I also believe that when it comes to innovation, there's just different elements that when you have some hands-on face-to-face, some creative collaboration, that some of that stuff does bode very well for face-to-face. And right now, our office right now is on a 50-50 schedule, so 50% of the people are in it. It rotates. But I've been very, very impressed with the productivity of our people. But I worry going forward.
I think you're right. I think we all have many of the same concerns. I think to Al's point, it probably never goes back to the way it was. We find a new happy medium. We need the spontaneity. We need the collaboration. We probably don't need to be in the same office environment every day in the way we were. And this is probably going to bring out a new way of doing things. Let's shift to a different discussion. Let's shift and talk about the consumer, because it's not just our businesses that have changed. The way we do business has changed. The consumer has changed. And there's a lot of different things we can get at with the consumer, but I'll just come at it this way. With each one of your businesses, you've brought on new customers. Everybody is up 10, 20 or more %. The question is, how do you keep them? How do you keep these new customers that you've never had before that have met the product? What's your plan to keep them? What are you telling Wall Street? What do you tell others? Ryals, go ahead.
Well, it's definitely a challenge, right? All of us have seen household penetration has been mentioned a couple times on the call today, and we've certainly experienced the same thing. And we've been able to get our products in the hands of a lot of new consumers. As you point out, the challenge is keeping them going forward. Jeff, I think obviously marketing dollars help. I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about e-commerce and that rise. I think that may be one of the most permanent changes that we see in my opinion. I'm not sure that behavior ever goes fully back, to brick and mortar. I think it's sort of permanently accelerated the growth of e-commerce. But I think a lot of consumers have come back to products and brands that they may have left for one reason or another. Whether it's because they're eating out all the time, they're on the go, it's dietary. There could be a gazillion reasons for it. But I think there are brands like the brands represented on this call today that have started to regain that trust with the consumer. That word was mentioned earlier too, and I think that's absolutely spot on. All of us deliver a wholesome, quality product. We're consistent. The service to the retailer is good. We're reliable. I think that matters. I think that how much in-home eating continues forward. Certainly not at the rate we saw at the peak, but I do think at least at some level that will continue. I think families have rediscovered sitting down to dinner together, including my own, and I think a lot of folks have really enjoyed that. And our brands want to be there for that purpose. And so making it, like we talked about earlier, with the shelves being stocked, it's the same thing on the digital shelf too. It's very important to us that we win that digital shelf, just like we seek to win the physical shelf. We have increased our marketing budget to try to keep the momentum going, keep the brands front and center with consumers as they go in the store. We know consumers, to the extent they're going to the store, are spending less time there. So, to the extent we can have those, off-rack displays or, make sure that our shelf set looks great and is fully stocked, the better off we're going to be. And they'll continue to think of us the first time if they're looking for a baked goods product.
Let me pick up on what you said and ask Al and Drew a slightly different question. You mentioned e-commerce. What is the most significant change, Al and Drew, that e-commerce means for your companies? It's here to stay. The numbers have grown quite substantially. How does it change your business most noticeably? Al?
For us, I think it's definitely getting in the pantry. Or getting in the search mode. So we got to be top of mind when you go. Typically, baked beans have not been a large item that is on e-commerce. A lot of items that we were seeing on e-commerce were more variety bean type items or ingredient type items. But now I think all our products are up, and so I think for us is being when you go in and get on that list. How do you get on the list and how do you stay on that list? Because people, when they're buying electronically, they're looking at what they purchased last time and seeing, hey, how do I repurchase it again? And so for us, I do think e-commerce is definitely here to stay. Now, whether it will stay at the level it's at now, I don't know. It may drop off a little bit, but it'll come back at some point. I think it's definitely something that will remain very high.
Drew, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, and I'm going to combine maybe two different topics.
Right, thank you.
E-commerce with another topic, because e-commerce is a very important platform for us, and what I'd like to see as we work to retain consumers, because for us our brand loyalty is incredibly high. People have preconceived notions about what the product should taste like. Then when they taste it, they're convinced, they're hooked. They love the brand, they love the product. So I think first and foremost, you've got to drive quality, because quality, then if somebody likes the product, they're going to continue to put it in their mouth. But I want to tie that e-commerce back to meal solutions, because people are looking for more convenience. They're looking for solutions. They're looking for intrinsic rewards that is going to bolster brand value. And I think this can be tied back to e-com, and it can't be done in a vacuum. So, and we've done this for the last 20 years, but I believe that complementary brands are going to need to come together and provide more solutions that make sense for the consumers, products that come from multiple categories, meat, produce, grocery, so we can take advantage of the trend and tie these brands that people trust together and take full advantage of it. And so this is where it goes back to e-com. I would ask that, or I'd love to see third-party e-com providers give an opportunity to develop or implement technology that brings meal solution together, because I think that's the one thing that worries me is when you go into a store, you have all the options, every option in front of you. You have so many different options from right to left, peripheral vision, and e-com. I think if we can use that as a better platform to help people build all those solutions and pull them together and take advantage of that, then it's going to build the e-com basket size. and there's hundreds of partners that can come together, that can work together to benefit each other's brands. So whether it's rice and beans or and potatoes and bread and just everything that comes together. And so I'm not looking at this naively just as our own brand, but how that serves the needs of the consumer on a more holistic basis.
Yeah,
that type of thing.
The idea of a mashed potato, baked beans fusion here sounds, we're on to something.
Right.
We're on to something. You got it. You got it. Hey, one other thing that Ryals brought up and Drew mentioned as well, talking about trust. One of the things that we did from a consumer standpoint, right off the get-go, was kind of stop our normal advertising, and we switched over to a reassurance campaign, more of a digital campaign. But hey, we're 112 years old. We've been here. We've seen pandemics before. We've seen world wars before. We've seen depressions and that sort of thing. So we're going to be here and kind of give a reassurance message, and then we roll that into how to help. And so, at that point, we started talking about Feeding America and some of our philanthropic things, and kind of tied it into, how we can help. And we talked about our visitor center and how we repurposed our visitor center to feed the local community and feed employees and do some of those things, because we didn't want it open for retail purposes. And then the third thing we did was then the third phase of that was how to use it. And that's really, getting to what Drew's talking about. But hey, how do we use this product now that you've got it in your pantry? So there was if you go back over the last 5 or 6 months, there's for us who typically would just normally have an ad campaign per season, we've really seen about 3 or 4 ad campaigns, from reassurance to how to help, and then how to use. And so that's been a big change in our business model. Like I said, we a lot faster pace than we would have normally changed advertising plan.
Are there other shifts, the Ryals or Drew, that you guys made from an advertising perspective, from kind of a CSR perspective? I know, Al, you touched on that you want to highlight.
The biggest one for us, just real quick, is we shifted a lot into digital and e-com. I mean, that was our biggest shift. Well,
and you have a lot of people that are home that are not normally home, and so we did the same: digital, e-com, social.
Okay, let's shift to the last area I want to touch on. Then we'll go to some open questions here. But let's talk about looking ahead. And one of the comments I've heard a lot of people make throughout this crisis is every week is like Thanksgiving. Well, what happens when we get to Thanksgiving then? What happens when we get to the holidays in general? Are you guys ready can you tolerate this wave continuing, the increased demand continuing? What happens when we get to the holidays? What are your concerns as we look through the rest of the year?
I'll let these other guys hit this one, because we've already been through our high holiday season. That's the summer for us. So, I mean, Thanksgiving's pretty good, but it's not near what it is in the summer for us. So we had a great summer. It all went great. I mean, I guess people were at home grilling anyway, just maybe hopefully not in large groups. But Memorial Day, July 4th, were really actually quite good for us. So I'll let the other two guys address the Thanksgiving and Christmas holidays.
Drew, go ahead. Your product is on a lot of plates that time of year.
Yeah, right now we're typically building inventory for the fall, but that obviously got absorbed and taken away. What we've been impressed with is suppliers, manufacturers. It's the beauty about economics. They'll fill the supply chain voids, and with incredible speed. And our people on our own front have also been working toward that end as well. I mentioned to you that we brought lines that were otherwise not running. We've transitioned how the workforce works. So we've made the necessary changes. We believe that we'll be ready for the fall as we're working toward that. We did put items on suspension, and now we're bringing those items back off the suspension this month as we speak. And so we hope that our early work that we did in the process will position us better for the fall, because we are going into our heavy season. And we know that's a concern. So we're doing everything we can to ensure that we can fill those capacity. It's the one time, we've joked internally that it's the one time that our VP of sales will actually report to the VP of ops, something that ops has always wanted, because it's no longer a situation where you're really selling to production capacity in this type of situation, and then managing it as well as you can. Because at the end of the day, our goal, one of our pillars of the company is to delight the customer, delight the consumer. And it's hard to delight them if you don't have the product. So we've taken a lot of measures. It's also adjusted how we spend capital and really accelerated our 5-year plan as to how we balance our capital plans between capacity and demand and safety, environmental, and quality. So it has caused us to relook at our business in a different way. And I actually think it's been a really good thing because it's kept us really sharp.
Let me ask this question. Al, I'll start with you. This will be the last question I have, then we'll open it up. As I mentioned before, you and Ryals, relatively new CEOs, but this situation has changed all of us, hopefully for the better in many respects. How are you a different leader today than you were 6 months ago? What's changed?
Well, I would say I'm definitely more open to change now than I was. It really did open my eyes to how you can work differently. I was a person, I'm a walk around kind of guy. So I love being out. I love, walking into people's office and doing just kind of a walk by and see what's happening. And so now when I come into the office, it's empty. I think now I'm a better communicator in a larger sense because, I'm forced to do those things. So now I need to send out weekly or biweekly communications, and I need to do videos and send those to employees because there was nothing. I just hated to stare into a phone and give a talk, but I kept hearing from employees, hey, we want to see you, we want to see people. And so I think those things have really, kind of opened my mind. And then I think there's a big trust aspect. I've always really trusted the employees, and this has made me feel so much better that everybody can be off in their own world and still, as committed as they've ever been, and working as hard as they've ever worked. And so, and then so appreciative of, what the plants have done and their ability to produce and come in and in a time of uncertainty, and really kind of fight through it. So those are things that I feel like, kind of that how I've grown last few months.
Great. Drew, you mentioned that you're more communicative now as a person, as a company. Anything else you'd add to that?
One thing as just kind of a final before we go on to Ryals and then get to the end is I think that the collective crises that we've dealt with to date during our careers, they've really prepared us to address the COVID issue. And I think it's the learnings of your team, your intuition, your empathy, and relevant data that will drive us toward making the best decisions and best solutions. Because you've heard a lot of times that, well, we've never been through this before. No, we haven't. But the collective crises has prepared us for this. And I think that what my experience has been through this process is weighing in on the team members, the leadership that have years and years of experience that have helped us carefully navigate it. And I've been very impressed with that. And I think that that's been more apparent for me. That's what I've learned is I've looked at the team and recognized the value is incredible.
Empathy is a great word. Ryals, you want to close that topic?
Sure. I'm just listening to Alan, Drew. I'm amazed by how consistent the thoughts are here because, communication is always important, but it's particularly in crises and in difficult times like this, it's even more important. I mean, people need to know that they're appreciated. All of us, all three of us have a lot of folks out on the front line working in plants. I mean, for us in many parts of the country where it's pretty hot. And then you have all of this other stuff, going on around you too, but they need to know that they're cared for. They need to know that they're appreciated. And then they need to see action behind those words, and staying in touch with them as best we can through videos and team communications when we can't actually be there is so important. Combining that with written communications, I don't think you can over communicate at a time like this. And it's also important that they all feel like they know what's going on, where the company's going, how we're handling the situation, how we're handling safety and all that. So constantly communicating that and then reinforcing it over and over and over too is important. And then the final point that I heard from both Drew and Al is the value of the team. I've always thought, and believe even more so now, if you have the right people, you have them in the right places, then as leaders we can set the agenda and call the play and then get out of the way and let the team go get it done. And it seems like all three of our companies have just that. We're very fortunate in that regard. That's great.
Well, thank you for those comments. I appreciate it. Let me shift over to some questions that came in. One that came in quite early was about packaging and any challenges you've had getting the packaging you need due to these increased demands. Al, I'm going to direct that at you because we've talked about this. We've talked about some of the challenges on the can front. You want to expand on that?
Yeah, I think one of the things with steel, and our suppliers have done a phenomenal job of getting us cans. But, one of the things, there's a lead time on steel. And so, and especially when you, for example, for us, going from a food service size can, which is a very large can, down to a retail size, which is very small. And so, but I think, the important thing there is to get the communication out to the suppliers early. And I think when we reduced the SKU count and got very specific about what we were going to need, we were able to do that early and provide that guidance for them. And so I think they've done a really good job of doing it. Now we do have some products on allocation, and we're managing those as necessary. But I would say, for the most part, we've had almost no issue with the cans. I think on the aluminum side they may be a little bit tighter supply, but on the steel side I think we've been fortunate.
You mentioned allocation. That leads to a different question that's come up several times. How has the customer responded? How did they respond then, and how are they responding now, knowing that most companies still have certain things that are on allocation? Can you guys, Ryals, want to start with you? Can you talk about that a bit? Although different.
You mean as far as assortment of products, or?
Yes. Yeah.
For us, honestly, for the most part, we're pretty much back to a full set now. There may be an area or two here or there where we're not, but generally speaking, we've pretty much migrated back to a full set. So.
What about you, Drew?
Yeah, we obviously had items on suspension and allocation, and we have been very impressed with the retailers as they have really partnered up very well. They understand our situation, and we've done everything we can to ensure that we fill the orders. And so we've been so impressed with the retail trade as they've been highly supportive through this entire process from the beginning all the way to today, as we start putting items back on the shelf. So we've been very pleased and very impressed at the same time with the retailers.
For those of you that have food service exposure, and Drew, I don't know if you have food service exposure. I know Al and Ryals do. Talk a little bit about, does this change your long-term planning? Do you want to be less food service exposed and more on the retail side? What's your thinking?
Well, for us, it's no surprise that the branded retail products carry the higher margin, but that's always been true. Our food service business is important to us, frankly. Always has been. It's always been a big support vehicle from us. As I said earlier, DSD is an expensive way to go to market. We're a high fixed cost company, and it does cover a lot of that overhead. Having said that, from a profitability standpoint, obviously, the mix shift from food service over to branded retail has been quite beneficial. And frankly, we were already underway with a portfolio strategy we started last year. And we'll probably, going into the future, we'll probably maybe be a little bit more selective about the type of food service business that we take. and ensure that it carries with it a margin that's acceptable to us and to the customer. But it has been and will remain an important part of our business.
Al or Drew, anything to add to that?
For us, it's a small part of our business, but it's very important to us. We have lines dedicated to it. And so to the extent that, we have capacity and a lot of restaurants, a lot of innovation comes from the restaurant side that you can bring into the retail side. So I think it's important there. And we do a lot of business with schools and universities. And, I believe that long term, you'll still be feeding kids and, at school, high schools, elementary schools, universities, they're going to go back to school. So I think that business will return.
Go ahead, Drew.
And I came with the business years ago in food service. So I absolutely love food service. The business we have in food service is well stratified. And so I don't see us making any major changes. We do believe that we're in a good position in food service. I've been proud of what food service has done during this period, and we'll continue to focus on food service as well.
Good discussion. I've got enough questions to keep us going here for another 20 minutes, but we said we would end promptly at 2:00 Eastern. It is 2:00 Eastern. I want to thank you guys. I want to thank everybody who dialed in. I want to encourage people who are still on the line. Please leave your thoughts in that chat session. We'll go in, we'll read those. Let us know what we could do better. Let us know what you want to hear in the future. Please do that. We're very interested in your feedback. But to the three of you, thank you. Not just thank you for participating. Thank you for what each of your companies have done over the last 5 months and will continue to do going forward. We know this has been a difficult time. The industry has stepped up and delivered. You've stepped up and delivered. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.